Welcome to night 15 to fall asleep fast. This is a quiet place where you don't need to focus, remember, or do anything at all. You can simply listen or let the sound fade gently into the background. If it feels right, you can softly like this video now or leave a calm comment sharing where you're listening from and what time it is. There's no need to rush. Everything here moves slowly. Tonight, we explore the genetic journey of skin color from early migration to modern Europe for sleep. A calm and unhurried story from the past, told gently, without urgency and without expectation. You don't need to stay awake for it. You don't need to follow every detail. If you were here last night, welcome back. And if this is your first night, you can begin right here, exactly as you are. A new night will be waiting for you again tomorrow. But for now, allow your breathing to slow, your thoughts to drift, and let this story quietly carry you toward rest. Beneath the wide and unbroken skies of Eastern Africa, the land stretched outward in soft gradients of gold and green. The air carried warmth that lingered gently on the skin, neither harsh nor pressing, but steady and familiar. Low grasses moved in slow waves when the wind passed through, and scattered trees stood patient against the horizon, their shapes darkening as evening approached. Nothing in the landscape appeared hurried. The earth seemed to breathe in long, unmeasured rhythms, as it had for countless generations. Small groups moved within this openness without disturbing it. Their presence felt woven into the terrain rather than placed upon it. They followed seasonal patterns that required no written record, guided instead by memory carried in the body and reinforced by repetition. Water sources were known through experience. Shade was understood by the angle of the sun. The rising and setting of light formed a quiet structure around each day, steady and dependable. Skin met sunlight in an unbroken exchange. Beneath the equatorial glow, melanin offered protection shaped over vast spans of time. There was no awareness of adaptation, no sense of process unfolding. It simply existed as balance. The intensity of ultraviolet light was constant and strong, and over thousands upon thousands of years, human bodies had settled into harmony with it. Dark pigmentation was not a feature remarked upon. It was an ordinary fact of being beneath this sky. As dawn arrived each morning, pale light widened slowly across the land. Figures stirred from rest, emerging from simple shelters formed of branches and grasses. These structures were temporary yet carefully made, offering relief from wind or sun without separating life from the surrounding world. Movement began gradually. Some walked toward nearby water. Others searched for edible plants or tracked animals whose paths had been quietly observed over time. Every action carried the softness of routine. Children remained close to adults, learning without formal instruction. Knowledge passed not through explanation, but through shared experience. The location of roots hidden beneath soil, the direction of migrating herds, the subtle signs of weather shifts, all were absorbed through repetition. Time did not press forward. It circled gently, marked by dry seasons and rains, by blooming plants and their gradual fading. When the sun reached its height, the light sharpened but did not surprise. Skin accustomed to its strength absorbed what was needed and deflected what was excessive. Shade beneath trees became a place of pause. Conversations were quiet and brief, more gesture than speech. The land itself held the greater presence. Heat shimmered above the ground in delicate distortions, blurring distance and softening edges. Evenings unfolded with equal patience. The sky shifted from white-blue to amber, then toward deeper tones that signaled approaching night. Small fires flickered to life, not as spectacle but as gentle utility. Smoke rose in thin vertical lines before dissolving into the cooling air. The warmth of flame mirrored the warmth of the day, though softer, contained. Shadows lengthened and merged, erasing clear boundaries between object and earth. Within this setting, human biology continued its quiet dialogue with environment. Generations passed without written memory, yet changes accumulated nonetheless, so gradual that no single lifetime could perceive them. Skin color, shaped long before by ancestral conditions, remained well suited to the intensity of equatorial light. Vitamin D formed efficiently beneath the sun's direct rays, while pigmentation shielded deeper layers from harm. The balance required no adjustment. It held steady, as constant as the horizon line. The openness of the landscape allowed movement without obstruction. Pathways formed not as roads but as faint impressions left by repeated passage. Over time, these routes connected water to shelter, shelter to hunting grounds, and one group to another. Encounters between neighboring communities occurred without ceremony. Exchanges were brief and practical. People recognized one another not as strangers, but as part of a broader, shifting presence across the land. Rain arrived seasonally, altering textures and scents. Dry grasses deepened into richer hues. The soil darkened and released an earthy fragrance. Temporary streams traced new lines across familiar terrain. With water came abundance, and with abundance came subtle shifts in gathering patterns. Yet even these variations remained within the larger rhythm. Nothing disrupted the equilibrium between human body and climate. Under the night sky, stars appeared with clarity impossible to ignore. The absence of artificial light left constellations vivid and near. Figures lay on their backs, looking upward without seeking meaning beyond presence. The same sky had stretched above ancestors long gone, and it would continue unchanged for descendants not yet imagined. In that continuity, there was no urgency to move beyond what was known. Still, movement existed as part of being human. Curiosity did not surge dramatically, nor did necessity push harshly, but pathways gradually extended. A valley explored one season might lead to another ridge the next. A distant line of hills, once only a faint outline, could become a destination approached slowly over years. Expansion did not announce itself. It unfolded as a series of small decisions: where to walk, where to rest, where to return. The land allowed this freedom. Its vastness offered both familiarity and possibility. While skin remained deeply pigmented beneath the steady sun, the seeds of future variation were already present in the quiet fact of mobility. Each step taken beyond familiar watering grounds introduced slight differences in exposure, subtle changes in altitude, in shade patterns, and seasonal duration. None of these differences demanded immediate response. They accumulated softly, almost imperceptibly. Within families, resemblance was clear but not uniform. Variations in tone existed even here, shaped by countless ancestral threads woven together over immense spans of time. These differences held no social weight. They were simply part of the visual landscape, as natural as the variation in leaf color or soil texture. Identity rested more in shared survival and memory than in appearance. As centuries drifted by, the environment remained generous yet demanding in equal measure. Sunlight continued to bathe the savanna with unwavering intensity. Skin responded as it always had, maintaining the protection necessary for life under open skies. The equilibrium between light and body persisted without conscious awareness. It was a quiet agreement written not in language but in biology. Gradually, almost unnoticed, some groups began to follow routes that stretched farther than seasonal patterns alone required. A river's bend might reveal fertile ground beyond its usual boundary. A herd's migration might lead toward terrain less familiar. These shifts were small, and they did not yet signify departure. They were extensions, gentle lengthenings of paths that had always existed. Even as these extensions occurred, the core rhythm of life remained unchanged. The sun rose. It crossed the sky. It set. Skin met its warmth each day as it had for thousands of years. Fires glowed briefly against encroaching night, then faded to embers. Children grew into adults who repeated the motions they had observed since infancy. Nothing suggested transformation. Nothing suggested urgency. And yet, in the distance beyond the known ridges, other lands waited beneath slightly different skies. The light there would fall at new angles. Seasons would stretch or compress in unfamiliar ways. For now, those differences remained only faint possibilities at the edge of awareness. The people beneath these first open skies did not anticipate change. They lived within continuity, grounded in a balance perfected over ages. The horizon, however, was wide and unending. And from time to time, a few figures would look toward it, not with restlessness, but with the quiet acceptance that the land, like the sky above it, extended farther than any single lifetime could contain. The first steps outward were not departures, only gentle movements along paths that slowly began to lengthen. The first steps beyond the familiar hills felt no different from earlier movements. There was no distinct moment when anyone decided to leave the old territory. Instead, the paths extended naturally, like threads gradually being unrolled across the landscape. What had once been a distant edge of sight slowly became part of daily experience. The earth itself changed almost imperceptibly beneath their feet. The color of the soil shifted from deep reddish browns to lighter shades. Grasses grew lower, shrubs a little denser. The air remained warm, but sometimes a softer breeze moved through, carrying a sensation unlike the winds of the open savanna. No one named these changes. They were simply observed, absorbed into the rhythm of movement. Water still determined the direction. Rivers stretched like silver ribbons across the land, offering a natural guide. Along their banks, plants grew in greater variety. Animals followed the same routes and people moved alongside them without haste. Days remained structured by light and dark, warmth and coolness. Yet the light itself was not quite the same. At times the sun stood slightly lower in the sky, its glow less intense than in the heart of the savanna. Seasons began to manifest differently. Where rain and drought had once followed clear patterns, now subtler transitions emerged. Cooler periods lasted slightly longer. Evenings brought a freshness that was new, though not unsettling. Skins long accustomed to the equatorial sun now experienced days when clouds filtered the light. The protection that had existed in balance for generations remained, while the environment offered gentle variations. The groups remained small, moving deliberately. Occasionally, some would split off, one part returning to familiar territory while others continued along a river bend or through a narrow pass between hills. These choices carried no weight of final separation. They were simply variations within a larger pattern of exploration and return. Over generations, what was once new became familiar. Children grew up with memories of landscapes their grandparents had only briefly seen. The boundaries of home shifted without anyone being able to mark them precisely. The sense of place widened, as though the horizon itself was slowly stretching outward. With each small movement, the quality of light changed as well. In some valleys, a thin morning mist softened the sun into a pale disk. In other areas, light-colored stones reflected the sunlight in gentler ways than the darker earth of southern regions. The body received these differences without awareness. Melanin continued its role, protective and steady, while the surroundings gradually offered more variation. There were days when the air seemed dustier, when dry winds carried fine particles across the ground. At other times, a cool current from higher terrain brought a softer atmosphere. The skin felt these shifts not as shocks but as whispers. Over countless lifetimes, these whispers would exert a quiet influence, yet within a single life they remained almost imperceptible. Landscapes became more open in some directions, more rugged in others. Rocky plateaus rose from plains, narrow passes invited passage. Human movement followed these natural lines. Steps were not straight, they meandered like the waters that guided them. Where food was abundant, they lingered. Where the ground was sparser, they moved on without restlessness. The color of the sky at sunset changed as well. Sometimes it was translucent and cool, with shades less golden, more soft blue. Shadows stretched longer, softer over the land. These small differences combined into a new sense of place, one that could be observed without demanding attention. Along these extended routes, other groups were occasionally encountered, following the same gentle paths. Their appearance differed little. Their skin carried the deep pigmentation that had offered protection for generations. Still, each meeting brought subtle variation in features and tones, quiet differences shaped by countless ancestors and environments. This variation was neither judged nor measured. It was simply noticed, accepted as part of human diversity. The paths they followed began to stretch toward areas where the sun's highest point was less direct. Days were milder, heat less intense. Clouds lingered longer on the horizon, and rain fell softer yet more consistently in certain seasons. The soil carried different scents, richer with organic matter. No sudden change occurred in skin tone or body form. Evolution moved not in leaps, but in breaths that spanned centuries. The genetic variation already present within the groups provided a silent foundation upon which natural selection could act slowly and without intention. Individuals with slightly lighter pigmentation lived alongside those with deeper shades, all still well adapted to the surrounding conditions. The sun, though less intense than in the heart of Africa, remained strong enough to sustain the existing balance. Yet on some days clouds tempered its direct light, and longer periods of moderate exposure emerged. These shifts were small, repeating year after year, generation after generation. As the paths lengthened, some groups approached higher latitudes. Routes led along coastlines where light reflected off water, or through mountain passes where the sun appeared briefly behind rocky walls. Each new landscape added a nuance to the experience of light and climate. Movement remained calm. There was no urgency, no drive to reach a particular destination. Migration was not a goal but a continuation of existence. Where the land could sustain life, it became temporary home. Where it was less abundant, it was a passageway. Children born in these northern regions knew the warm parts of the old land only through stories, not as history but as memories woven into daily life. For them, this landscape was taken for granted. Lighter air, cooler nights, longer twilight, these formed their first impressions of the world. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the sun began to remain lower in the sky in certain seasons, its rays slanting over the skin. Ultraviolet intensity decreased slightly. Across the vast time of human evolution, such differences formed a backdrop against which natural selection quietly worked. It was not a process one could notice. No change occurred within a single generation. Rather, it was a gentle shift in opportunities, where small variations in pigmentation subtly influenced outcomes over many centuries. Paths that had once been short and cyclical were now long routes connecting continents. Yet each step still felt like an extension of earlier movement. The sense of home remained flexible, moving with the horizon. And as the groups continued, they approached areas where the light would again feel different. Softer in intensity, paler in color, filtered through unfamiliar skies. The change was not sudden, but gradual, as if the world itself slowly shifted in tone, without anyone being able to point to the moment it began. The new horizons unfolded slowly, as though the earth itself was breathing, stretching its edges gently into the distance. Hills rose and fell with a quiet rhythm, and the sunlight fell across them in soft, golden patches that shifted as the day advanced. The people who moved across these lands did so without hurry, their steps attuned to the undulations of the terrain, the gentle play of light and shadow, and the calm whisper of the wind through the grasses. Every rise and dip in the ground was observed with a slow attentiveness, yet nothing demanded attention or action. The vegetation changed gradually. Grasses grew in lighter hues, interspersed with low shrubs and occasional young trees. Their leaves caught the sun and flickered with a soft, muted glow. Small flowers appeared in hidden hollows, their colors delicate against the earth, offering gentle touches of contrast. The air carried faint scents of damp soil and fresh growth, each inhalation a quiet reminder of the subtle transformations of place. The presence of water, a brook or trickling stream, added a reflective quality to the surroundings, mirroring the sky and softening the outlines of distant hills. Light itself seemed to move differently across these new lands. Morning rays stretched longer over slopes, softened by the early haze, while afternoon sunlight drifted across open plains in a gentle, diffused glow. Shadows elongated and blended into the landscape rather than defining it sharply. Each shift of light invited careful observation, a slow noticing that did not demand focus but simply allowed the eyes to rest upon the shapes and colors around them. Paths began to meander more openly. Where earlier trails had adhered closely to known rivers and gentle valleys, now the ground invited wandering across open fields and along low ridges. Movement followed the natural contours, stepping lightly across stones and soft earth. The air was cooler in shaded hollows, warmer on open ridges, and the rhythm of walking adjusted unconsciously to these small variations. Occasionally, a shallow depression in the earth collected morning dew, which shimmered in the light and reflected tiny fragments of the sky. Rocks and boulders marked the horizon in gentle clusters, not imposing but quietly shaping the flow of passage. Some were smoothed by wind and rain, their surfaces warm under the sun, their textures offering soft relief to touch if someone paused to notice. Between them, thin grasses and small shrubs filled the spaces, creating a patchwork of color and shadow. The landscape felt alive in the quietest of ways, breathing slowly as it had for centuries, indifferent yet constant, observed only in subtle recognition. The sky stretched wide above these horizons, pale blue softened by intermittent clouds drifting lazily across the expanse. Their forms shifted gradually, casting ephemeral shadows over the hills and plains, altering the sense of depth and distance without interruption. Birds moved in gentle arcs overhead, their silhouettes blending with the clouds and adding a quiet sense of life to the scene. Sound remained minimal, the rustle of leaves, the soft murmur of wind, the occasional drip of water from a leaf into a small pool. The soil offered a tapestry of textures. In some areas, fine sand held the faint impressions of passing feet. In others, small stones formed scattered patterns that shifted with every step. These details were noted unconsciously, part of the sensory rhythm of movement. Bodies adapted with subtle grace, finding balance on uneven surfaces, adjusting instinctively to slight inclines, and taking in the nuances of temperature and light. Skin, still carrying the protective pigmentation of past generations, met the new light with ease, absorbing warmth and filtering exposure without thought. Along the distant ridges, the people observed horizons that hinted at broader lands beyond. Valleys softened into plains, plains gave way to gentle rises, and in each turn of the path, something previously unseen revealed itself. A glimmer of water in the distance, a slightly darker stand of trees, a stretch of bare earth catching the sun. These were not discoveries demanding attention, but gentle invitations to move and observe, integrating slowly into the awareness of place. Occasionally, small animals passed through the grass, their movements light and unobtrusive. A fox paused, watching from a distance before disappearing between shrubs. Birds dipped to the surface of streams, then rose again, their reflections briefly mirrored in water. Each interaction was quiet, unobtrusive, forming a soft layer of life over the changing terrain. The rhythm of movement mirrored that of the creatures and the environment, soft, measured, unhurried. Time passed quietly. Hours shifted as sunlight played across hills, valleys, and open fields. Each day brought minor differences in the way light fell, how shadows stretched, and how warmth lingered in sheltered areas. These variations were subtle, almost imperceptible, yet they left traces in the perception of those moving through the land. The body and senses adjusted with an ease born of generations, attuned to nuance and flow rather than sudden changes. From higher vantage points, horizons extended beyond familiar reach. Hills appeared further than they truly were, water reflected sky more broadly, and distant woodlands softened into misty outlines. Each new perspective invited a slower pace, a careful absorption of scale and depth without urgency. The land unfolded like a story being read softly, each paragraph of hills, valleys, and streams lingering long enough to settle into awareness. Evenings brought a different quality of light. Sun slanted low, golden but not harsh, highlighting textures in the soil, the bark of young trees and the soft sheen of leaves. Shadows blended gradually, lengthening across ridges and plains, deepening the sense of space. The wind calmed, carrying a faint coolness that encouraged rest and pauses along the path. People adjusted their pace naturally, slowing as the day softened, the new horizons gradually folding into the familiar rhythm of their movements. The journey across these lands was measured, patient, and unobtrusive. Horizons widened without alarm, light shifted without sudden contrast, and movement across hills and valleys felt like the continuation of a dream unfolding at its own pace. Each step integrated the new terrain quietly, allowing the body and mind to align with the subtle rhythm of land, water, and air. In these moments, the land itself seemed to breathe slowly. Streams reflected the pale sky, grasses shimmered with dew, and every gentle incline, every soft shadow, offered calm to those who moved along. Nothing demanded more than quiet observation, and every experience was absorbed in the steady, unhurried cadence of day and light. And as the day drew onward, the first hints of distant water passages and narrow routes beyond the hills began to appear, glimpses of bends in rivers and breaks in ridges that would invite further movement. The horizon stretched gently, hinting at the next phase of quiet exploration, soft and uninterrupted, waiting for the next step to guide the way. Streams and rivers began to wind more prominently through the landscape, tracing silver paths that reflected the pale morning sun. The gentle curves of water guided the travelers as naturally as the hills had, leading them through valleys that opened slowly, then narrowed again into small, sheltered corridors between stone and earth. The ground was softer along the banks, damp with hidden moisture, and the sound of water moving over pebbles filled the air with a steady, quiet rhythm. Feet followed this rhythm unconsciously, stepping lightly across soft soil, pausing only when the flow of the river suggested a slower pace. Narrow passages formed between low ridges and clusters of rock. Some required careful stepping over uneven surfaces, others gently funneled travelers along naturally carved paths, guiding movement as the land itself seemed to breathe. Moss and lichen-coated stones and muted shades of green and gray, softening the edges and adding a texture that invited a quiet touch. Each step was deliberate, yet calm, integrated into a rhythm dictated not by urgency but by the natural flow of terrain and water. The rivers reflected the sky in a subtle spectrum of colors, pale blues in the morning, washed with soft gold as sunlight filtered through scattered clouds. Ripples and tiny eddies mirrored the slow drift of leaves along the banks, and occasional fallen branches created gentle pauses in the flow, where water swirled in a quiet, unhurried dance. The observers moved alongside, noting these small currents with soft attention, their eyes following each motion without effort. Vegetation along the waterway shifted gradually. Tall grasses bowed with moisture, soft reeds brushed gently against passing feet, and clusters of wildflowers nestled in shaded pockets. Their colors were muted, creams, pale yellows, soft lavenders, blending with the earth and water. The air carried a faint, damp scent, mingled with the sweetness of blooms and the freshness of river stones warmed by the sun. Every inhalation was calm and steady, a rhythm that matched the slow movement of walking and flowing water. The terrain alternated between wide, open banks and narrow, sheltered corridors. Where water widened, small sandy beaches offered a place to pause, to observe the gentle shimmer of reflections. In tighter passes, movement slowed naturally, constrained by the land yet unobstructed in spirit. Light filtered differently here, softer and diffused through overhanging branches or between rocky walls, creating patterns that shifted slowly with the sun. Shadows stretched and blended, offering a sense of depth without contrast, a quiet relief to the eyes. Animals, few and unobtrusive, accompanied the journey. A heron stood silently at the water's edge, its reflection mirrored perfectly in the gentle ripple. Small mammals paused to drink, then vanished quietly among the reeds. Birds moved through the air in soft arcs, their shadows drifting across the water and soil alike. All life adhered to the slow rhythm of the landscape, neither hurried nor hesitant, simply existing in harmony with the flow of rivers and passages. The travelers noted subtle changes in the sun's quality as it traversed the sky. Light that had once been broad and constant now softened in narrow canyons, filtered through foliage or bouncing off smooth stones. In these moments, shadows extended in slow gradients across the ground, and the warmth of sunlight became a gentle caress rather than a commanding presence. Time itself seemed to stretch, measured by the gradual movement of light and water, the undulating patterns of land and sky. Crossing small streams required stepping stones, mossy logs, or narrow earthen bridges. Each crossing was an exercise in calm attention, a delicate adjustment of balance that became part of the flow rather than a distraction from it. Feet landed lightly, movements synced with the slow ripple of water beneath, creating a soft continuity between the traveler and the natural world. In wider river stretches, reflections of distant hills and clouds created a mirror image that stretched perception. Horizons were doubled in water, yet both the reflection and the land beyond merged seamlessly, producing a calm, almost hypnotic effect. Observers found their breathing slowing in response, in tune with the gentle rhythm of moving water and drifting light. Evening brought new qualities to these passages. Sunlight slanted at lower angles, catching the tips of reeds and the smooth surfaces of river stones, bathing the water in faint, soft gold. Shadows deepened gradually without harshness, and the air cooled subtly as the river carried evening moisture inland. Movement slowed further, steps lighter and more deliberate, in harmony with the diminishing warmth of the day. Across small inlets and bends, new terrain revealed itself slowly. Openings between ridges hinted at broader valleys, still unseen but suggested through soft shifts in light and air. Water reflected these distant forms, merging them into a quiet panorama that extended the journey without insistence. The landscape seemed to encourage the mind to rest, to absorb without effort, and to continue moving at the pace of the rivers and narrow passages themselves. Each passage, each crossing became part of a greater continuum. The travelers, the animals, the wind, and the flowing water all moved in unison, softly and without hurry. The experience of light, reflection, and shadow merged with the tactile awareness of earth beneath feet, the coolness of water at ankles, the gentle resistance of moss and stone under touch. It was a world observed in slow layers, each one settling into the consciousness of those who moved through it. As the day waned, rivers curved gently toward broader valleys, and the narrow passages gradually gave way to open stretches of land once again. The journey across these waterways had not ended but prepared the senses for the next stage, where light itself would change in subtler ways, inviting awareness without urgency. The mind could drift freely along with the landscape, flowing as calmly as the waters themselves, carrying the traveler toward the next horizon. The sunlight changed slowly over the open landscape, each hour revealing new tones and gentle contrasts. Morning gold gradually softened into pale yellows and muted whites, bathing hills, rivers, and fields in light that seemed almost to hover above the earth. Shadows, long and unhurried, stretched across ridges and valleys, shaping the land without urgency or abruptness. The travelers noticed these shifts without conscious thought, their bodies and eyes attuned to the calm rhythm of day, allowing perception to settle gently rather than focusing sharply. Along the paths, grasses bent slightly under the soft warmth of early rays. Leaves glimmered as dew caught the light, and small pools reflected the sky with muted perfection. Sunlight filtered through low branches, drifting across moss-covered stones, the contrast softened by the slow movement of clouds above. Each subtle change in illumination altered the texture of the world quietly, inviting the eye to wander without demand, to rest upon surfaces in a manner both calming and unhurried. Hillsides caught the sun at varying angles, highlighting gentle slopes while leaving deeper hollows in soft shadow. The interplay of light and shade was unremarkable yet endlessly absorbing, a visual cadence that accompanied each step without interruption. Colors shifted imperceptibly, the warm ochres of soil, the pale greens of young plants, the subdued gray of distant stones, all blended into a harmonious whole under the evolving sky. The air itself carried traces of sunlight. Warmth brushed the skin, neither intense nor forceful, but consistent, a soft layer upon which movement and observation unfolded naturally. Breezes moved quietly across the plains, rustling leaves and grasses, diffusing the sunlight further, and mingling with the faint aroma of damp earth and growing plants. Each inhalation was gentle, each step measured without thought, flowing as smoothly as the progression of light itself. Streams and rivers reflected these changes with delicate precision. Water glimmered and shifted as sunlight touched it differently throughout the day, the surfaces capturing clouds and trees in transient patterns that were never still. Rocks beneath the water shimmered, the movement of liquid distorting reflections in slow, hypnotic ripples. Observers walking along the banks absorbed these transformations without effort, attuning to the soft play of illumination and motion. The higher reaches of hills and ridges provided a broader view of light's gentle movement. From these vantage points, valleys appeared deeper yet calm, and distant woodlands glowed faintly under sun-dappled sky. Shadows stretched across fields, softened at edges, merging with the terrain in a manner that invited quiet attention rather than direct focus. The mind could wander as freely as the light, tracing curves, slopes, and mirrored reflections in rivers and streams below. Along shaded paths, light drifted through leaves with a delicate dapple, creating slow-moving patterns on stones and soil. In hollows, sunlight was minimal, diffused by surrounding vegetation and softened by mist or early evening haze. These subtleties were not noticed actively but absorbed gradually, weaving into the consciousness like a gentle melody. Movement slowed in harmony with these soft variations, feet pausing unconsciously in moments where shadows deepened, or light filtered more fully through branches. The sun's path gradually shifted over the course of hours, altering the perception of scale and depth across the terrain. Hills that appeared small in morning light expanded gently as shadows receded, while valleys softened under the low afternoon glow. Rivers and ponds changed color subtly, reflecting sky and land differently at each stage. The sensory rhythm of observation, walking, and light combined into a steady, unhurried flow, a quiet immersion in the evolving day. Animals continued their slow routines beneath this softening sun. A heron moved deliberately through a shallow pool, wings flicking softly as water shifted around its legs. Small mammals paused at the edge of shade, ears turning to the rustle of leaves, before returning to their gentle foraging. Birds dipped across open skies, their reflections occasionally mirrored in calm pools, moving in arcs that harmonized with the lengthening shadows. Every element contributed to the quiet, continuous pulse of the environment, supporting a calm awareness rather than demanding attention. In open plains, sunlight seemed to linger longer on gentle slopes, warming rocks, soil, and grasses. Distant hills, previously faint, gained clarity as golden light drifted across their surfaces, softening textures yet emphasizing form in a subdued way. Travelers paused without thinking, adjusting pace to match the tranquility of illumination, stepping lightly across softened soil and low stones, their bodies and senses aligned with the quiet rhythm of sun and shadow. The sky itself displayed the gentlest transitions, from soft blues to pale golds and muted whites, occasionally interrupted by drifting clouds that shifted shadows subtly across terrain. Light and air merged in quiet harmony, creating an atmosphere that encouraged slow breathing and restful observation. Even the smallest details, the shimmer of a leaf, the faint ripple in a river, the coolness of shadow, worked together to produce a gentle continuity that carried the mind forward without strain. As the day continued, observers noticed the effect of prolonged sunlight on the land and its colors. Hues deepened and softened in turn, warmth lingered in sheltered hollows, and every slight incline or depression became part of a slowly changing canvas. The rhythm of walking followed these changes naturally. Steps lightened in shade, slowed in warmth, paused momentarily where reflection or color captured attention, then continued gently as if the body itself had adapted to the evolving light. Evenings approached with a gradual decline in brightness. The sun slanted lower, painting long muted shadows that stretched across plains and hills. Light warmed the surfaces it touched, but its strength diminished slowly, leaving the air cooler, the soil tempered, the water surfaces soft and reflective. The environment invited the mind to settle, body to relax, and thoughts to drift quietly with the final rays before twilight. And as the light softened toward dusk, the landscape, hills, water, and shadowed paths merged into a tranquil rhythm that gently guided the traveler's attention without requiring it. The journey through sunlight had not ended but flowed seamlessly into the longer shadows and muted evening colors that awaited ahead, preparing the senses for the next chapter of quiet observation. The plain stretched outward, bathed in the subtle elongation of shadows as the sun lowered toward the horizon. Each gentle hill and small rise cast soft, muted lines across the earth, forming patterns that shifted imperceptibly with the day's slow descent. Light touched the tops of grasses and stones while shadows lingered in the hollows, extending gradually, as if the land itself were sighing and settling into the quiet rhythm of evening. The travelers moved with unhurried steps, allowing their gaze to follow the gentle interplay of illumination and shade, the way shadows stretched across distances without abruptness or disturbance. Along the lower slopes, the interplay of light and shadow created gentle contrasts in color and texture. Patches of soil, previously indistinct, now appeared warmer under the remaining sunlight, while depressions and shallow hollows became pools of soft darkness. The effect was subtle yet encompassing, wrapping the landscape in layers of muted tones and quiet forms that invited calm attention without demanding focus. Shadows flowed like soft rivers over the plains, merging and separating in a continuous, unhurried dance that the eye could trace without effort. Occasionally, a cluster of stones or a small rise cast more pronounced shadows, yet even these were softened by distance and the gentle diffusion of light. The plains seemed to stretch farther, each shadowed contour accentuating the sense of depth, while the surface remained welcoming and familiar. Movement across this land became an unspoken conversation with light, a quiet negotiation of rhythm and pace as footsteps aligned naturally with the subtle shifts underfoot. The grasses themselves responded to this gradual change. Tall stalks bent lightly beneath the lingering warmth of sunlight, brushing against one another in soft murmurs carried on the evening breeze. Dew glimmered faintly where shadows had receded, catching the final rays and refracting them into muted glints that drew the eye without urgency. The texture of the land, the fine undulations of soil and stone, was revealed in slow layers, each new angle of light presenting the familiar in a quietly altered way, maintaining the sense of calm continuity. Small animals moved across the plains with ease and deliberation. Rabbits and hares traced invisible paths, halting briefly in sunlit patches before disappearing into shadowed recesses. Birds shifted positions as the day dimmed, perching in low shrubs or flitting along gentle drafts of air, their movements smooth and unhurried, blending with the elongating shadows. Even the wind itself seemed to follow the lengthened forms, brushing softly over the land and stirring leaves and grasses in time with the slow arc of the sun. Paths formed naturally as the travelers moved, guided less by necessity than by the perception of light and shade. Their steps became synchronized with the rhythm of the environment. A slight pause where shadows deepened, a gentle adjustment where sunlight highlighted uneven ground, a quiet stretch across open fields where light lingered warmly. Time itself seemed to expand, measured not by hours or minutes, but by the elongation of shadow and the subtle movement of air across the plains. Distant hills became more pronounced as shadows lengthened across valleys, the contrast between illuminated and darkened surfaces deepening gently. The eye could wander freely over the expanse, tracing ridges, hollows, and the delicate outlines of stone and soil. Each element of the landscape contributed to a sense of calm continuity, the stretching shadows weaving together the plains into a unified, quiet whole. Intermittent clusters of trees and shrubs punctuated the plains, each casting its own muted patterns upon the ground. Light filtered through sparse foliage, softening edges and blending shadows with the earth. In these shaded pockets, textures shifted subtly, soil darkened, leaves glimmered faintly in remaining light, and the gentle sway of branches created moving patterns that merged seamlessly with the surrounding plains. Observers allowed their attention to drift, absorbing these quiet movements as if reading a slow, wordless story written by nature itself. Small waterways and depressions in the land reflected portions of sky and sunlight, forming miniature mirrors amidst the fields. Shadows played across these surfaces as the day's light waned, producing subtle ripples of reflection and tone. Observers felt their own movements harmonize with these delicate transitions, stepping lightly, pausing gently, and integrating the visual rhythm into a calm, unbroken flow of experience. As the sun approached the horizon, colors softened across the plains. Muted gold and gentle amber stretched across hills and flatlands alike, blending seamlessly with the deepening shadows. The landscape assumed a calm, continuous pattern of light and dark, an environment where observation could unfold without effort, where the mind could settle into the steady, tranquil rhythm of the day's decline. The travelers continued forward, their pace slow and deliberate, guided by the interplay of long shadows and residual sunlight. Every ridge and hollow contributed to a seamless sense of place, each step echoing the soft, unhurried pulse of the land. The plains stretched on, inviting eyes and body to move in harmony with light, shadow, and the gentle contours of the terrain, preparing the senses for the next chapter of observation among older trees and sheltered groves. Beneath the slowly darkening sky, the travelers entered a grove of ancient trees, their trunks thick and gnarled with the slow passage of time. Branches stretched outward, interlacing with one another to form a gentle canopy that filtered the waning sunlight into soft, dappled patterns on the forest floor. The shadows, long and unhurried from the plains, continued here but adapted to the intimate scale of the groves, creating pockets of calm where light and shade mingled freely. Each step forward carried a hushed rhythm, soft upon moss, fallen leaves, and delicate roots, as if the land itself guided movement with quiet insistence. The air held a delicate mix of earthy fragrances, damp soil, aged bark, and the faint whisper of decomposing leaves. Small streams of filtered light illuminated patches of fern and low shrubs, highlighting textures without abruptness. Observers' eyes traced the lines of branches and the gentle curves of roots, discovering subtle forms without urgency. Even the smallest leaves seemed to capture attention briefly before releasing it back to the quietude surrounding them. As the grove expanded, the trees varied in size and age, some younger, their slender trunks rising with elegance, others older, their bark thickened and patterned with centuries of growth. Light shifted gradually through their branches, the angle of the sun casting delicate, moving mosaics upon the ground. The travelers' footsteps adapted unconsciously to these changes, stepping lightly where shadows deepened, pausing softly where sunlight pooled in open spaces, their bodies synchronized with the serene rhythm of the grove. Birdsong mingled with the occasional rustle of small mammals moving through underbrush, each sound muted and slow in its effect. A squirrel, delicate and deliberate, moved along a low branch, pausing briefly in a sunlit opening before continuing into the shadowed interior. Insects drifted lazily through shafts of light, their subtle movement a gentle punctuation to the ongoing stillness. Even the breeze seemed measured, drifting through leaves without disturbance, carrying faint scents and shifting the play of light across bark and foliage with quiet consistency. The canopy created a sense of shelter and enclosure without confinement. Branches and leaves diffused remaining daylight, casting soft mosaics that shifted imperceptibly as the sun descended. Shadows were long but never harsh, folding into themselves and merging with the rich, earthy tones of the forest floor. Each stone, root, and fern became part of a continuous, unhurried pattern, allowing attention to wander without effort or strain. The grove's intimacy contrasted with the expansiveness of the plains, providing a gentle, comforting variation in the journey through light and shadow. Moss covered the bases of older trees, thick and pliant underfoot, absorbing sound and movement in a subtle hush. Fallen leaves layered the soil in soft tones of gold, bronze, and muted green, shifting slightly under the weight of each step. Occasionally, a low-hanging branch swayed gently, brushing against another as though acknowledging the presence of the travelers, but never intrusively. Every small movement was part of the grove's quiet, continuous rhythm, guiding perception slowly, like a soft tide of awareness that required no effort to follow. Here, the interplay of shadow and light took on a more intimate scale. Pockets of bright sunlight revealed the fine textures of bark, the gentle curve of young leaves, the shimmer of moisture on moss. Adjacent patches remained in muted shadow, inviting eyes to rest and drift without urgency. The forest floor undulated subtly beneath the shifting illumination, revealing roots and stones, depressions and rises, all part of a slowly unfolding visual story. Movement through this space became a form of calm observation, the senses absorbing details without active pursuit. Small clearings occasionally appeared, each with a slightly different character. Some offered wider views of distant tree lines or glimmers of sky through higher branches, while others remained secluded, a quiet sanctuary of concentrated shade. The travelers allowed themselves to linger in these spaces, stepping lightly, observing with gentle awareness, and noticing the subtle interplay of color and form that shifted with each passing moment. Even the smallest variations, the tilt of a leaf, the sparkle of dew, the curve of a root, were noted softly and released, contributing to the continuous, unhurried pulse of the grove. Throughout the grove, trunks varied in texture and hue, some darkened with age, others lightly sun-kissed, their bark a mosaic of lines, fissures, and patterns. Each tree contributed to the rhythm of shade and light, creating a mosaic that the eye could follow without effort, a landscape of stillness punctuated by gentle motion. The air carried the faint, subtle hum of life, bird wings brushing branches, insects drifting, leaves whispering in measured breezes, blending into a calm soundscape that encouraged slow breathing and relaxed attention. As the day progressed toward evening, the grove deepened in tranquility. Light softened further, shadows lengthened, and the colors of bark, leaf, and moss blended into warm, muted tones. The land seemed to exhale softly, and the travelers moved in alignment with its pace, aware of the subtle changes in temperature, light, and sound, yet never compelled to observe them sharply. The grove became a refuge of gentle continuity, a space where time seemed to fold over itself, allowing attention to drift quietly across textures, colors, and forms without demand. Every element, from the tallest trunk to the smallest fern, contributed to this calm, continuous rhythm. Each step, each breath, each glance integrated naturally with the grove's slow unfolding. The forest floor, the canopy, the filtered light, and the soft shadows merged into a single, seamless experience, guiding perception gently toward a readiness for the next stage of quiet observation, where flora and color would invite the eye to notice subtle patterns across the landscape. The forest floor opened into a quiet world of delicate colors, where every leaf, moss patch, and subtle flower contributed to a gentle tapestry of hues. The sunlight, filtered through the canopy above, traced golden lines over soft greens and muted browns, highlighting the quiet intricacy of undergrowth without drawing sudden attention. Observers allowed their eyes to drift from one gentle shade to another, noting the faint interplay of light upon textured surfaces, the blending of tones across moss-covered stones and fallen leaves, and the soft emergence of color in areas where the sun lingered a moment longer. Small clusters of wildflowers peeked through low grasses, their colors subdued yet distinct, pale blues, soft yellows, muted purples, each contributing to the understated rhythm of the forest. The petals swayed slowly with the barely perceptible movement of air, a gentle dance that harmonized with the quiet pulse of the grove. Every plant, no matter how small, held a pattern, a subtle variation in hue that reflected the slow, unhurried passage of the day. Shadows fell across leaves and petals in long, softened lines, creating a quiet, natural gradient that invited the eye to linger and drift, unhurried, from shape to shape. Mosses formed cushions along the bases of trees, their soft green tones deepening in shadow, brightening where thin beams of sunlight pierced the canopy. The texture was rich and inviting, small ridges and soft indentations creating quiet variations that encouraged gentle observation. Fallen leaves and muted ochres and soft siennas layered the ground in delicate patterns, their edges curling subtly as the air shifted and moved around them. Each step over this gentle floor produced a soft rustle, absorbed in part by the cushioning moss and the low hum of forest life, a soundscape of calm continuity. Among these subtle colors, tiny shoots pushed upward, their tender stems catching the warm glow of light in fleeting moments. Dew glistened faintly upon them, refracting sunbeams into gentle sparkles that were absorbed quickly into the quiet ambience. Observers could follow the bending stems with soft, wandering attention, noticing the curves and angles without effort, letting the visual rhythm guide their own pace, and allowing focus to relax into the unbroken flow of calm. Ferns and small shrubs created a layered canvas of green, each frond slightly different, each leaf catching light at a slightly different angle. The interplay of shadow and illumination made textures appear almost three-dimensional, soft ridges and valleys forming gentle contours across the forest floor. The movement of air shifted the shapes in barely perceptible waves, adding an understated liveliness to a scene otherwise steeped in stillness. Every subtle variation in color or form invited a quiet, reflective gaze, without the need to memorize, judge, or act upon what was seen. Among flowers and low plants, tiny imperfections and variations added character and depth. A leaf slightly darker on one side, a petal bent softly toward a shaded corner, a mossy stone catching a slant of light. These small details formed an intricate, continuous visual story. Attention could wander through them freely, like tracing a slow, gentle melody, each note blending softly into the next. No abrupt changes, no urgency, only the calm rhythm of nature unfolding. Occasional clearings revealed more subtle contrasts. In these spaces, the spectrum of color shifted gently, with sunlit patches brightening muted earth tones, and shadowed recesses softening into rich, quiet greens. Each flower, each small plant, became a point of gentle reflection, guiding the eye without pressing the mind to act. The scene was alive, yet lethargic in its vitality, encouraging deep breaths and a steady calm that extended through every subtle color and every quiet movement. Water trickled through shallow depressions in the forest floor, reflecting the softened hues of surrounding flora. Reflections were calm, fragmented lightly by gentle ripples, capturing the muted spectrum of leaves, moss and flowers in a liquid mirror. The effect was continuous and unhurried, a quiet reinforcement of the overarching calm, inviting the mind to rest within the slow, natural flow of observation. Each ripple, each shift of light on water or plant, merged seamlessly into the next, creating an environment where stillness and motion coexisted harmoniously. As light continued to fade through the grove, the colors shifted subtly toward warmer, deeper tones. Shadows lengthened, and leaves and petals seemed to blend more seamlessly into one another, softening contrasts and encouraging the senses to slow. The forest became a gentle collage of understated hues, each blending with its neighbors to form a visual experience that was continuous, comforting, and fully immersive. Observers felt their perception of time and detail ease, drifting across the palette of flora in unhurried exploration. Every flower, fern, leaf, and patch of moss participated in this gentle narrative of color and light. Observers moved through the space with careful, soft steps, allowing their attention to float from hue to hue, from shape to shape, tracing patterns without expectation or demand. The subtle shifts of light, the muted reflections, and the delicate contrasts created a seamless, calming rhythm, preparing the senses to notice the quiet stirrings of life that inhabited the undergrowth, awaiting the next chapter of gentle motion among small creatures. Within the quiet tapestry of leaves and flowers, life moved with gentle deliberation. Tiny insects traced invisible paths along stems and petals, their movements slow and rhythmic, a subtle pulse threading through the undergrowth. Each step, each flutter of wings, and each quiet rustle was absorbed into the calm environment, so soft that it became nearly impossible to distinguish from the breeze or the whisper of shifting leaves. Observers could notice these small stirrings without effort, letting their awareness drift with each delicate motion, a natural extension of the quiet attention already devoted to colors and textures. A dragonfly hovered over a shaded patch of water, its wings vibrating softly, catching the light in almost imperceptible flashes before it glided to rest on a low reed. Nearby, ants carried tiny fragments of leaves along familiar trails, moving with consistent, unhurried determination, tracing lines across moss and soil that were part of the grove's subtle architecture. The forest seemed alive yet still, each movement gentle and integrated into the ambient rhythm. Observers' eyes followed the drifting insects and slow shifts of small creatures as though tracing a slow, calming melody across the forest floor. Birds perched quietly in the canopy, their calls soft and intermittent, blending seamlessly into the surrounding hush. One bird lifted into a patch of sunlight, hovering for a brief instant before gliding back into the shade of a branch. The motion was smooth, almost meditative, and the soft sound of wings brushing against the air added to the continuous, unhurried narrative of the grove. From above and below, life intertwined in a quiet ballet, small motions weaving together without disruption, inviting a patient gaze that wandered freely and without expectation. Along the shaded forest floor, small mammals moved with quiet deliberation. A rabbit paused at the edge of a clearing, its ears flicking attentively as it sensed the gentle sway of branches and the filtered light through leaves. It shifted slightly, then continued along a hidden path among moss-covered stones and fallen branches. Every step seemed synchronized with the grove itself, the forest absorbing the movement without altering its serene, steady rhythm. Observers could follow this movement as though moving alongside it, each step a part of the gentle flow of life within the forest. Amidst ferns and low shrubs, beetles and spiders navigated the shadows, their presence quiet and continuous, creating a subtle texture of motion that complemented the stillness of moss and flowers. Dew-laden leaves glimmered faintly as the creatures brushed past them, reflecting muted light that added a soft, ever-changing element to the visual landscape. The quiet of these micro-movements enhanced the overall sense of calm, with attention drifting across each subtle detail without strain, forming a deep, restful awareness of life unfolding in slow, deliberate patterns. Occasionally, the breeze nudged branches or petals, prompting small, coordinated movements among insects and leaves. A moth shifted gently from one shaded leaf to another, while a spider adjusted a thread within its delicate web. The motions were unhurried, each part of the forest's extended choreography, allowing observers to absorb each gesture without anticipation or conclusion. Life unfolded in layers, with insects, birds, and small mammals contributing to a calm mosaic of movement, seamlessly blending with the subtle textures and colors of the forest environment. Light continued to filter gently through the canopy, emphasizing some movements and softening others. Shimmers of sun upon wings or dewdrops caught for a moment before fading back into muted tones, guiding the eye gradually from one observation to another. Observers felt their own breathing and focus align with these gentle cycles, each movement of life inviting a corresponding slowing of perception. The forest became a sanctuary of quiet continuity, a place where the rhythm of living things merged naturally with the rhythm of attention and calm. In a small clearing, a squirrel climbed a slender trunk, pausing briefly to adjust its path and then proceeding with deliberate, almost meditative motions. Nearby, a cluster of ants disappeared into the shade, reappearing in soft, predictable patterns along mossy ridges. Each creature's movement was simple and unhurried, and yet it carried a subtle poetry, a quiet narrative of patience and grace. Observers could trace these motions as if following a slow, gentle river of life, each ripple blending with the next, forming a continuous, soothing cadence that extended through sight and sound alike. As the light shifted toward evening, the subtle movements slowed further. Shadows deepened, colors became muted, and the delicate interplay of life and environment blended into a soft, indistinct pattern. Tiny wings folded, insects paused upon leaves, and small mammals retreated into the comforting embrace of moss and root. The observer's attention, now fully attuned to these gentle movements, could drift freely, guided by the slow, persistent pulse of life within the quiet forest. The experience prepared the senses to follow the final unfolding of day into night, the transition from motion to the calm stillness that would settle across the land. Every flutter, step, and shift among the flora and fauna contributed to a deep sense of tranquility. The observer could remain attentive without effort, eyes moving gently from one subtle motion to the next, allowing perception to glide over the forest's rich but subdued activity. The combined rhythm of light, color, and motion became a continuous, soothing current, inviting complete relaxation and preparing the mind and body to ease into a slower, more restful pace. As the final light of day softened, the landscape began to fold gently into twilight. Shadows stretched across the ground, blending with the muted colors of earth, stone, and foliage, creating a seamless tapestry of subdued tones. The movements that had defined the day, small wings brushing through the air, delicate steps of unseen creatures, and the subtle rustling of leaves, began to slow almost imperceptibly. Each flutter, shift, and ripple gradually merged with the dimming light, forming a quiet rhythm that invited the observer's senses to settle and expand into the calm around them. The horizon stretched wide, softened by the slow descent of evening. A gentle haze began to mingle with the fading glow, blurring the outlines of distant hills and trees, allowing each feature to drift softly into the next. The air held a faint coolness, carrying the quiet whispers of leaves brushing against one another, the soft hum of hidden insects settling into rest, and the distant, almost inaudible movements of birds retreating to their roosts. All of it was a slow, natural choreography, a gentle transition that required no attention, no effort, only the ease of quiet observation. Along the river that wound through the valley, its waters reflecting the muted blues and silvers of the sky, a few ripples stirred as the current moved calmly over stones. Tiny fish shifted beneath the surface, barely disturbing the stillness, and the faint scent of damp earth rose from the banks. The river seemed to exhale slowly, a measured, serene rhythm mirrored in the movements of swaying reeds and the occasional descent of a leaf drifting onto the water. Every detail harmonized with the softening light, inviting a sense of surrender to the evening's quiet pulse. Among the distant meadows, grasses bowed under the subtle weight of the night air, moving only when stirred by the gentlest of breezes. Shadows pooled and elongated, drawing the eye across the expanse in calm, uninterrupted waves. Insects that had been active throughout the day had retreated to the shelter of tall grass or under the bark of trees, leaving behind only the faintest traces of their passage. Observers could feel the stillness settle in, a gradual deepening of calm that allowed the mind to drift freely, unanchored by urgency or expectation. The forest edges, once lively with tiny motions, now seemed to exhale a slow, measured sigh. Branches remained poised in stillness, and the soft rustle of leaves became rarer, punctuated only by the occasional passing of a nocturnal creature moving silently to its hidden refuge. Light itself had become gentle, the last amber rays fading into silvery tones, reflecting off stones and fallen leaves, bathing the landscape in a muted, serene glow. Every object, every contour of the terrain, merged seamlessly with its surroundings, creating a continuous, calming panorama that stretched from one edge of the eye to the next. In the villages and hamlets scattered across the land, chimneys no longer sent curling trails of smoke into the sky. The faint outlines of roofs and streets blended with the encroaching twilight, and even human presence seemed to fold into the calm. Fires dwindled to embers, the quiet hum of distant conversation faded, and doors and shutters closed with a soft, reassuring finality. The world itself exhaled into silence, a slow, enveloping calm that left room for only the gentle awareness of the evening and the gradual settling of night. Above, the sky transitioned from muted blues to deeper, softened indigos. Stars began to flicker faintly, shy at first, and then more persistently, dotting the heavens with quiet light. Clouds drifted lazily, moving without haste, reflecting faint glimmers from the last light of the horizon. The gradual dimming of the sky mirrored the stilling movements below. The last bird flitted silently to its resting place, insects remained motionless within protective foliage, and the gentle hum of air and water merged into a single, soothing current. Across the open fields, the whisper of tall grass and the faint sway of trees became almost imperceptible. Each step of wind or rustle of animal life blended seamlessly into the quiet symphony of twilight. Shadows softened even further, and the contrast between objects dissolved into subtle gradations, leaving the observer with a sense of a world slowly folding into itself, a calm and enduring presence that needed nothing more than patient attention. As night deepened, the distant hills and valleys became nearly indistinct, their forms absorbed into the growing darkness. The last faint glimmers of light faded behind ridges and treetops, leaving only soft outlines that gently dissolved into shadow. The subtle chorus of small movements and quiet air had fully transitioned to stillness, the world prepared to rest beneath the wide, deep sky. Observers, attuned to these rhythms, could feel their own awareness softening, their thoughts slowing, and their senses drifting with the gentle settling of the land. Everything had shifted towards stillness. Each element of life, light, and sound had gradually diminished into calm. The observer's mind could now move freely without focus, tracing the faint, harmonious echoes of movement that had once filled the day. The land, once active with color, motion, and subtle rhythms, now existed in a serene suspension, perfectly balanced, quietly poised to hold the observer in its embrace. The night had arrived fully, and with it, the invitation to surrender entirely to rest, to allow the gentle quiet of the world to carry one deeper into calmness and sleep. You don't need to keep listening anymore. The story can fade into the background now, becoming softer with every moment. If you're still awake, that's perfectly fine. There's no rush and nothing you need to remember. Just let your breathing slow down, let your thoughts drift where they want to go, and allow the quiet of this night to settle around you. This story will remain here, gently playing while you rest. Tomorrow night, a new night will be waiting for you, and it's one you won't want to miss. And if sleep hasn't arrived just yet, you can quietly return to one of the previous nights, and let those stories guide you instead. For now, sleep well.